Have you ever reached a point where you felt spiritually stuck? Not because you stopped believing in God, but because you felt distant from Him. You still prayed, you still went to church, you still listened to worship music, yet something felt different, something felt missing. That is exactly where I found myself before I decided to try fasting for 7 days. I was not looking for a miracle. I was not trying to impress anyone. I simply wanted to get closer to God again. I wanted to hear His voice more clearly. I wanted to remove the distractions that were constantly competing for my attention. I wanted to know what would happen if I genuinely dedicated 7 days to seeking God with my whole heart. The night before I started, I was excited but also nervous. If I am being completely honest, I was already thinking about food. I was already wondering if I would be able to finish what I had started. Many people talk about fasting as if it is easy. They make it sound simple, but when you actually decide to do it, reality hits differently. Suddenly, you realize how much of your day revolves around eating. You realize how often you snack without thinking. You realize how often you eat because you are bored, stressed, tired, or emotional. Before the fast even began, God was already teaching me something important. He was showing me that many of the things I thought I needed were actually habits that had become deeply rooted in my daily life. Day 1 was not as difficult as I expected. I felt motivated. I felt focused. I spent extra time reading my Bible and praying. I listened to worship music throughout the day. I kept reminding myself why I started. But by the evening, I could already feel my body protesting. The hunger was real. The cravings were real. Every advertisement seemed to be about food. Every conversation somehow involved food. It was almost funny how much attention my mind suddenly gave to things I usually ignored. Yet in the middle of that struggle, I noticed something interesting. Every time I felt hungry, I remembered to pray. Every craving became a reminder to seek God. Every uncomfortable moment became an invitation to depend on Him a little more. By the second and third day, the excitement started wearing off. This is where many people quit. The emotional motivation that carried me through the beginning was fading. I was tired. I felt weak. My body wanted comfort. My mind kept trying to convince me that stopping would not be a big deal. Maybe some of you watching have experienced this in your own spiritual journey. You start strong. You feel passionate. You feel inspired. Then the challenge becomes real. The emotions disappear. The excitement fades. Suddenly, obedience becomes harder. Fasting taught me that faith is not just about how we feel when everything is going well. Faith is about continuing to trust God even when our feelings are not cooperating. One of the biggest surprises during the fast was discovering how noisy my life had become. I did not realize how many distractions were constantly competing for my attention. Social media, entertainment, news, notifications, endless scrolling. During those 7 days, I started spending less time consuming content and more time sitting quietly before God. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. Most of us are so used to constant stimulation that being alone with our thoughts can feel strange. But after a while, that silence became peaceful. I began noticing things I had ignored for months. I became more aware of my attitudes. I became more aware of my fears. I became more aware of areas where I needed God's help. Around the middle of the fast, I experienced something that many believers rarely talk about. I became emotionally vulnerable. Small frustrations felt bigger than usual. Old memories surfaced. Hidden worries came to the surface. At first, I thought something was wrong. Then I realized God was exposing things that needed healing. Sometimes we stay so busy that we never stop long enough to deal with what is happening inside our hearts. Fasting has a way of slowing us down. It removes some of the things we use to distract ourselves. It forces us to face what we have been avoiding. That process can be uncomfortable, but it can also be incredibly healing when we allow God to work in those areas. As the days continued, my prayers started changing. In the beginning, I spent a lot of time asking God for things. I asked for direction. I asked for blessings. I asked for answers. But as the fast continued, I found myself spending more time simply enjoying His presence. I was not rushing through prayers anymore. I was not treating God like an emergency contact that I only called when I needed something. I started talking to him honestly. I started listening more. I started appreciating who he is rather than only focusing on what he could do for me. That shift was one of the most valuable lessons I learned during the entire experience. When day 7 finally arrived, I felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and amazement. Physically, I was ready to eat again. There is no point pretending otherwise, but spiritually, something had changed. My circumstances had not suddenly become perfect. All my problems had not magically disappeared, yet I felt closer to God than I had in a long time. I felt more aware of his presence. I felt more sensitive to his guidance. Most importantly, I realized that fasting was never really about food. Food was simply the thing I temporarily gave up. The real purpose was making more room for God. The real purpose was learning dependence. The real purpose was drawing near to the one who had been waiting for me all along. If you have been feeling spiritually dry, distracted, discouraged, or distant from God, maybe this is your sign to spend intentional time seeking him. It does not have to be a 7-day fast. It does not have to look exactly like my journey. But if you genuinely seek God with your whole heart, you may discover that he is much closer than you think. And sometimes, the breakthrough you are looking for begins the moment you decide to put him first again. One of the biggest lessons I learned from fasting for 7 days is that spiritual growth rarely happens in comfort. We all love the idea of getting closer to God, but many of us do not enjoy the process that often comes with it. We want the peace without the surrender. We want the breakthrough without the waiting. We want the answers without the discipline. During my fast, I realized that some of the strongest moments of growth happened when I felt uncomfortable. The hunger reminded me that I do not have control over everything. The tiredness reminded me that I need God's strength more than my own. The quiet moments reminded me that God often speaks when we stop talking and start listening. Many people watching this may be going through a season that feels uncomfortable right now. Maybe you are waiting for a job. Maybe you are praying for healing. Maybe you are dealing with heartbreak, disappointment, or uncertainty. What I learned is that difficult seasons are not always signs that God has abandoned you. Sometimes they are opportunities for God to draw you closer to him. Sometimes the very thing that feels like a setback is actually preparing you for something greater. Another lesson that hit me hard is that distractions are one of the biggest enemies of spiritual growth. Before fasting, I did not realize how much of my attention was being pulled in different directions every day. There was always something to watch, something to scroll through, something to worry about, or something demanding my focus. None of these things were necessarily bad on their own, but together they created so much noise that I struggled to hear God's voice clearly. I think many of us can relate to that. We live in a world where our attention is constantly being fought over. We wake up and check our phones before we pray. We spend hours consuming content but only a few minutes in God's presence. Then we wonder why we feel disconnected spiritually. Fasting helped me see that sometimes the problem is not that God is silent. Sometimes the problem is that our lives are too loud. The more I removed distractions, the more I noticed God's guidance, peace, and direction. It reminded me that if we want a stronger relationship with God, we have to intentionally make room for him in our daily lives. A third lesson I learned is that many of the battles we face are deeper than what appears on the surface. Before the fast, I thought I was simply giving up food. What I discovered was that God was exposing attitudes, fears, doubts, and habits that I had been ignoring for a long time. There were moments when I had to confront my impatience. There were moments when I had to admit that I was carrying worries I had never fully surrendered to God. There were moments when I realized I had been relying more on my own understanding than on his wisdom. This is something many people experience in life. We often focus on fixing external problems while ignoring what is happening inside our hearts. We try to change our circumstances without allowing God to change us. The truth is that lasting transformation begins internally. God cares about our character just as much as our circumstances. He cares about who we are becoming. Sometimes He allows us to slow down because there are lessons we can only learn when we stop running from them. The final lesson I want to share is this: God is closer than most of us realize. Before the fast, I honestly thought I needed to find God again. By the end of the 7 days, I realized that He was never the one who moved away. He had been there all along. He was present during my good days and my bad days. He was present when my faith felt strong and when it felt weak. He was present even when I was distracted and spiritually tired. The fast simply helped me become more aware of His presence. I believe there are people watching right now who feel distant from God. Maybe you feel like you have made too many mistakes. Maybe you feel like you have drifted too far. Maybe you think God is disappointed in you or no longer interested in your life. My experience taught me the exact opposite. God is still calling you. God is still listening. God is still ready to welcome you closer. You do not need perfect words, a perfect past, or a perfect life to come to Him. You simply need a willing heart. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough begins with one simple decision: choosing to seek God again, one day at a time. As I close this message, I want to leave you with a simple reminder. Whatever season you are in right now, do not give up on God because He has not given up on you. If my 7-day fasting journey taught me anything, it is that God is often working in ways we cannot immediately see. Some of you are carrying burdens that nobody knows about. Some of you are praying prayers that seem unanswered. Some of you are trying your best to stay faithful while feeling tired, discouraged, or spiritually dry. I want you to know that you are not alone. God sees every tear, every struggle, every silent prayer, and every effort you make to draw closer to Him. Keep seeking Him, even when you do not feel anything. Keep praying, even when the answers seem delayed. Keep trusting, even when the road ahead is unclear. One moment in God's presence can change more than years of trying to do everything on your own. If this message encouraged you in any way, let me know in the comments what lesson spoke to your heart the most. I would also love to hear if you have ever fasted before, or if you are thinking about starting your own journey with God. Your story may encourage someone else who needs hope today. Thank you for spending this time with me. May God strengthen you, guide you, and fill your heart with His peace as you continue walking with Him. Until next time, stay encouraged, stay faithful, and remember that the God who brought you this far is not finished with your story yet. Red folded.